Hello and welcome to Access Chat. I'm delighted that we're joined today by Johny Cassidy. Johny is a journalist for BBC and also um, leading their disabled staff employee network. So, Johny, great to have you with us. Really, we've had a fantastic conversation over the last 30 minutes before coming on air. Probably should have recorded some of it, but so I've known of you for years because I grew up supporting assistive tech on the BBC, but it's great to actually talk with you in person. So tell us a bit about your role as a journalist and as a user of assistive tech, because I think that a lot of people don't really come across that many journalists that are assistive tech users outside of the context of the BBC and some of the other BBC broadcasters. It's not that common. So we have a global audience here. So over to you.
Thank you, first of all, Neil, and thank you to you and Deborah for inviting me on. It's such a privilege to be invited here. I've listened to a lot of the stuff that Access Chat have been doing over the years, so it's brilliant, first of all, to be invited. I've got a bit of imposter syndrome, but hey, I've had that for all my life. But I think my role, I've been a journalist at the BBC for over 16 years, and primarily I was a business journalist, business and economics journalist. More recently, I moved over into digital. And I am an assistive tech user. I use JAWS screen reader. And I've always, I guess, battled with internal systems, software systems that we use. A lot of it is accessible in many ways, but there's lots of bits of it that aren't. And a lot of assistive tech users will understand this, that on the surface, you're like a swan. You're gliding gracefully, you're doing your work, but underneath you're paddling away like Billy because you're having to work in many ways with your hand tied behind your back. And I think, that's been a bonus, in many ways. When I first started at the BBC as a journalist, I would have editors say to me, I've worked on the Today programme and Five Live and Breakfast TV, all the major network programmes. And people would say, right, Johny, we're doing a whole piece on the GDP figures coming out tomorrow. Can you get me guests for the Today programme, Five Live, Breakfast, News Channel? I'd say, yeah, absolutely. And they would have said, well, it's all within the contacts database. You can just go and find them there. And I couldn't use the database because it wasn't accessible. And instead of me really sort of saying, no, I can't do that because there's a barrier there to me doing my work. This before I understood the social model of disability or anything. I would have said, yeah, absolutely, no problem. And then I would have spent time finding my own guests, and it would have meant me trawling through newspapers. So I would have looked online to the Financial Times or the Telegraph or whatever, and find people that were talking about what was upcoming in the GDP figures, what to expect. I'd find an economist or somebody that was a good economics commentator, and I would talk to them, book them, and 9 times out of 10 people would be coming up to me afterwards going, geez, Johnny, where did you get that person? They're brilliant. They're really good. I've never come across them. Have you been hiding them somewhere? And it was because I wasn't able to go into the database, and a lot of people would have just went to that database of the usual voices, and so that was an advantage, really. That's not to say that we don't need to work a lot harder on systems. As a journalist, we've got lots and lots of different tools that we use. And for me, it's about making sure that those tools are accessible. Disabled people in all walks of life bring a lot of different understanding, knowledge, creative insight, innovative ways of thinking and problem solving. But to be able to bring that all to use, you must be able to have the tools at your disposal in the same way that everybody else has. And that's a bit of a long-winded way around me saying that that's how I got really interested in digital accessibility, both in terms as a user, but also for the audience. I'm somebody who is a news user, I suppose. So I want to be able to access news in exactly the same way as anybody else. So it's why I became really interested in visual data journalism and the accessibility of that. And, it's just led me down lots of different roads.
Right. It's such a good point. That I think that story you just told, Johnny, about how the database was inaccessible, but you didn't want to tell them it was inaccessible. You don't want to be a whiner, right? With so many people with disabilities, they just try to make sure that they don't cause any problems. But
Yeah,
I'm also fascinated that you had to go through all these workarounds, but you would have these really brilliant successes
yeah.
associated with it. Not that we're encouraging people
No,
to
I know.
to make things inaccessible so that we can be more creative. But that's just such a powerful story. And I assume now, of course, you don't have to do stuff like that. But that's just such a powerful story. I just wanted to note. So thank you for that. And I also want to comment that you said an imposter syndrome. So many of us, I know I have had the imposter syndrome for so long, but I like how you had the imposter syndrome and you think you shouldn't be on this program. We obviously totally disagree with you because your work is so important. And I know I'm joining from the United States. We love BBC. So many Americans that I hang around with, we would prefer to get our news from BBC as opposed to sometimes American options. And I don't know all the working parts that make it work at BBC, but I just know as a consumer, I'm grateful for journalists like you and BBC. I'm also appreciate them understanding the value that you bring to the table as an employee. So I don't think you should have imposter syndrome because we all think you're really amazing. Just saying, but
Thank you. I record that and just play it on my phone down again? That'd be really good. But, funny you should say it. I've been at the BBC 16 years, more than 16 years, and I still don't understand how it works. There's, it's such a huge, mammoth, just an unbelievably massive organization with lots of different moving parts. And loads of people, loads of colleagues doing brilliant, brilliant stuff. But it's often hard to find, people that you can tie up with that are in the same page and wanting to do the same things, but they're there. And quite often, there's people doing stuff already that's not getting the audience that it needs, or it's not getting, the outing that it should have. But I think, as well as me being a journalist at the BBC, I'm also the co-chair of as Neil said, the co-chair of our Disabled Staff Network, and it's coming. That brings people, disabled colleagues from all areas of the BBC together, and it really ties things up. So the whole time I've been at the BBC has been within news, within the division of news. But there's obviously now I've met so many people outside news that are doing brilliant, brilliant stuff. And it's, for me, even coming on, as I said, to this podcast and everything, I feel as if when I started that role as the co-chair of our Disabled Staff Network, I found my tribe. I found my people. And it's not about, to me, it's not about impairment or condition or disability. It's about people who understand and have good empathy and want to make a difference. That's the tribe that I found. And it's for years, in a work setting, I didn't really find that. I found people that were colleagues that I really got on with, that I liked as people. But, as friends, I have found when I've started doing this work as an advocate and as a champion for accessibility and disability, that's when I found that people really, really have in the workplace setting.
I'm curious about your journey at the BBC, and I would like to know from you, when you joined it back and you had to talk with people about accessibility, about what you were doing, about its importance. Do you feel that when you are doing the same today, we are in a better place, or the effort is still the same?
It depends what day you ask me. And depends what my latest win or experience has been. It's win, lose, or score, draw. You're always on a roller coaster within accessibility, I think. We keep horses. My wife is really into horses, and she rides. And we always laugh about it because one day she might have a brilliant ride, and it's so good, and the horse has been brilliant and well behaved and everything. And everything is 100%, and the sun is shining, and everything's brilliant. But if that mare has been like a bit of an idiot, then you're only as good as your last experience. That's what she thinks in the horse. And for me, it's the same with accessibility. It's, you could be in a place where you've had 4, 5, 6 interactions that have all been great, and people get it and go, yeah, we must do this. But the flip side of that, you might have 5, 6, 7 interactions, and people go, yeah, but we can't do this because X, Y, Z. So yeah, it all depends. I think I really have to be aware as well. I think it's very easy to get stuck in an echo chamber and stuck within the realms of people that get it, that you talk to all the time, within different teams, and you go, yep, we need to do this. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And they understand it straight away. The challenge for me is talking to people who don't get the need for digital accessibility. I'm always ready to try and win hearts and minds for them. For me, it's about how do we manage to do that? How do we ensure that that message is going through? And it's constant. It's constant. Loads of people that I talk to in accessibility, digital accessibility, understand the issues around burnout and everything, because it's challenging. It's challenging. Sometimes you just feel as if you're banging your head off a brick wall.
I think before we came in, I talked about how you're framing accessibility as a larger audience now. As an organization that is all about communication, the key thing about accessibility is access to information. If you're not accessible, you're not communicating with the audience. Now, if we were in retail, we'd be framing it differently. You'd be saying you're not making the most of your opportunities to sell stuff. But I think that, as people that are advocating for better accessibility and, that continuous work, as you mentioned, we do have to frame how we talk about it in the context of the people that we're working with.
We do. I call this tickle and trout. I've done talks in the past for different people. My grandfather was a fisherman, and like all fishermen, he used to tell tall tales, but he used to talk to me about tickle and trout, and it was when you had, when you're trying to catch a trout, it was easy to, if you could get it and sneak up on it, when it was in the shallows, and you could somehow start stroking it, you got the trout into a state of relaxation and would almost jump into your net. So he would always tell me that story as a wee glint in his eye. It's about getting people to do what you want them to do, but without them knowing that that's what you're doing. So it's coming at them in what is going to be a win for them when you're trying to get somebody to do something. How can you get it to be something that they can take away and say, yes, this is going to be really good for me? So I used to talk about accessibility, and I could tell that people were nodding off and eyes glazing over, because it's thinking, accessibility is something that people think is as hard. It makes your designs ugly. It's something that's going to cost money. And that's all fallacy. That's all myth, as you know. So it's about what way can I convince people to do what they should be doing, but is going to be advantageous for them. And for any big organization, any media organization, is about audience, and it's about reaching an audience. So when I start talking about the need for better alt text, the better text descriptions, the better accessibility of visual data journalism, if I talk about audiences, people get it. We are, and all media organizations have got reams and reams and reams of data and audience analytics and metrics and everything at their fingertips. So if we start looking at making content that is going to meet people and is going to be designed for people in whatever platform or whatever way that they're accessing it, that's going to be a win-win for everybody. And that's what I started talking when I talk about accessibility. I frame it as audiences. And you're right, Neil. Audiences are our customers that you would be doing as the chief executive of a retail organization.
I think I'm really interested to see the metrics. Right? So you just talked about you've got all these metrics about audience engagement and everything else. Super interesting to see the difference in levels of engagement between a comparable accessible versus inaccessible experience, and see what that actually does in terms of driving up audience and engagement.
Yeah.
And I think that that's not just in terms of accessible for screen readers, because we all know that there's multiple different areas of accessibility, and the BBC's done a lot of good work in the past on looking at these different aspects, including cognitive accessibility and so on. But if you do the work on addressing all of these different audience segments, what impact does that have positively? Because I think that one of the things that we lack in the accessibility world is actually really good, solid data. There's a lot of storytelling about how the benefits will be, and a lot of very large numbers that people quote, where once you start digging behind it, a lot of it's based on assumptions rather than real metrics. And so the things I'm always keen to do is have really solid metrics and solid methodology behind some of the stuff we're talking about when we're trying to make those kind of statistical arguments about accessibility.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. But I would also say that, historically, I know there's other assistive tech users that are parts of audience other than screen readers. But I think if I look at it from the way screen reader users have been in the past, alt text for a lot of media organizations hasn't been a priority.
Yeah.
So, a lot of people have just got used to having rubbish alt text. And I think it's only since the introduction of stuff like generative AI, and the different apps and different platforms that you can do, and you can get a really good detailed description of an image. It's opening the world for a lot of people, and now people are expecting better alt text, better text descriptions on their images. So we're coming from a low base, I guess, because people won't historically have said, look, this is really bad, because it's what we've always had. And it is going to be interesting to see now, if audiences start demanding better accessibility for the stuff that they've got. Because, if we talk accessibility, for me, it's more about a user experience, and it's about that journey, isn't it? A lot of accessibility is built around compliance and whether or not it adheres to WCAG 2.2 or whatever. But that's about compliance. We should be going further and further and further and further, and providing really brilliant, beautiful user experiences. And then people come away going, crikey, that was good. That was good, rather than having to struggle through to get the information that you're after.
And be so frustrated.
Say that again.
And you're so frustrated at that point. You're just so frustrated that it's so hard to get the information that you need to get. And Johny, I just wanted to ask you, I know that Antonio has a question too, but I just wanted to ask you a little bit more about your experience as a journalism with disabilities. Because I know that I love the posts that you're posting. I love your voice. And that's why I noticed the work you were doing. We love BBC. BBC actually was the very first guest we ever had on Access Chat was BBC. So But one thing that I think that some of us thought was when AI came around that it would just, is going to replace the need we have for journalists and reporters and content providers and stuff. Yeah, I think there were people that were afraid of that, and we did see layoffs and stuff. But also wanted to talk a little bit about your perspective. I mean, even that you. I'm curious how you even started at BBC, and why did
Mm.
BBC? I mean, I just think that I think that you have a really powerful story to explain to the society. So
Mm.
anyway, I was just curious what you thought about it from that angle, and then I know I'll turn it back over to Antonio.
Thank you. Well, the truth is, Joe, I got into journalism for a long time. I lived quite an adventurous life, I suppose. I lived in squats in London and I was really, I, I wasn't really focused on career. I liked what I was doing. I was happy. Then, as every good love story happens, I met someone. We had our first daughter, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to have to start doing something. Um, to my daughter will one day get older, and I didn't care. I never have cared what people think about me. But what really struck a spark with me was I started thinking, I do care what people think about me through the lens of my daughter.
Ooh.
And I was very aware of what people thought about disabled people. And if I carried on the path that I was doing, even though I was so happy doing what I was doing, which was nothing basically, I knew that people would judge that and it would ultimately go on to my daughter. But I wanted my daughter not to fall into that trap as well. So my mum died and she left me a few pounds, and it wasn't that much at all. Wasn't much, but I used it then to go on and do my postgrad in journalism and became qualified. And I was so naive because I completed my postgrad in broadcast journalism, I think in June, maybe 2008. And about 2 weeks after that, I applied for a job at the BBC and got it. And, I realised how incredibly lucky I was, but I still think that was because of, my mum was there. She'd recently passed away. It was her money, and I was determined that it was going to be something that was going to change my life, that it was ultimately going to be a benefit to me and to my family. And I think, I then became a journalist, and, the rest is history, as I say. But it was because I didn't want other people to judge my daughter for having a disabled blind father that
Wow.
I really wanted to do something that was going to be something that she could be proud of. It
Wow.
wasn't for me to be proud of, but it was something that my children would be proud of, because no matter what we say, how far we've come down a road or whatever, or the world becoming more equal, the simple fact is that there's still a lot of historical prejudice and stereotypical tropes around disability. And people will say it. My daughter's now, she's a lot older, and both of them are. But a lot of people will still say, but your dad's blind. And she says, yes, my dad works at the BBC as a journalist. And for her and for both of them, it's brilliant for them to be able to come back and say, yeah, we'll put that in your pipe and smoke it. And that's what I knew would happen. That's what I knew would happen. So, it's taken away that stereotype and that prejudice. So even back then, I knew that I wanted to do something to try and make a bit of a difference. But, it wasn't for me. It was for, what my children were going to be in the future.
Wow. Bravo.
So that's how I fell into journalism, really, and it's been an incredible journey. And the BBC is a really, really good employer. Neil has been there in the past and knows all about the assistive tech and the work that's there. The tools, again, this is about social model stuff, isn't it? If I have a screen reader and I have compatible software and compatible platforms that I use, all I need is the gift of the gab, my mouth, and an ability to tell a story and talk to people on the phone and translate their story into something that I think audiences are going to want to hear.
Powerful. Antonio?
No, I have a good number of friends who are journalists, in the different countries. And if I go to the BBC website, it's very clear where accessibility is reported, and you are able to see different stories and topics in different areas. But why don't the journalistic practices does that more frequently across the pond? The BBC is an example, but why do you think that others are not doing as much?
That's a really good point. I think it's, I basically think it's again to do with that historical prejudice. I don't have the stats to hand, but if 24% of the population is living with a disability or condition or impairment in the UK alone, that varies across the world, but I think it's about 1 in 5, 20%, a billion plus, as we say. There should be more stories about it, but the truth is that within journalism, there's not enough disabled people at senior decision-making levels, who are choosing what stories it is that we hear. Because there's going to be stories that are going to be relevant to a huge majority of the audience, but if the editor has never had any experience or lived experience of that, then they're not going to understand, how relevant, important, or pertinent that is to a big, massive part of the audience. So I think it's about another piece of the puzzle, and it's another reason why I became the co-chair of our staff network. I really, really want to push for more recruitment, for more career progression in the BBC, but also outside the BBC. We should be seeing more disabled journalists. We really, really should. I've been organising a big festival in December, and it's all about how we, at the BBC, but also outside the BBC, get more disabled people into news and sports journalism. So it's about understanding what the barriers are. And again, social model. What's the technical barriers? What's the attitudinal barriers? What's the physical barriers? If we understand them and try and get other leaders in positions of power and positions of influence to understand them, if we can remove them barriers, then it should slowly begin to change. But we've been having these conversations for a long time. And I speak a lot at conferences, journalism conferences, about diversity and the need for more disabled people in newsrooms. And time again, I see the same people in the audience, that are there. And I said, it's coming to the point where I'm going to have to say, look, you were here the last time I spoke about this. What have you done about it?
Right.
And people don't want to hear that yet. And you have to be very gentle, with people. And I've learned that, and that's come with experience. My natural state of being isn't to be that gentle person. I'm a bit like a bull in a china shop. Sometimes, just get it done. But, that doesn't come across very well a lot of the time. So I think, again, let's come back to what I was saying to you, Neil. We have to I need to convince people in a way that's going to be advantageous for them.
Right.
And this is about audiences. We get more disabled, it's not rocket science. We get more disabled journalists talking about, and it's not just disabled people. We need more diversity in general. I think there's a lot of questions that need to be asked about journalism. The model, some might say that it needs to be fixed. It's broken. How do we do more community-based journalism? How do we get people from different backgrounds to be able, and that are in parts of different communities, and give them the power to be able to tell the stories about their communities, but in a really, really trustful way. There's a lot of communities that are distrustful of the media for whatever reasons, because when their stories are being told, it's being told through an inauthentic way or an inauthentic lens. So it's about trust. So there's a lot of different answers there, Antonio, but I think the first thing really is to get more disabled people, more people from diverse backgrounds and decision-making levels in major news organisations, and we can try and hopefully filter the stories down through.
It's not just the professionals either. And then just full circle before we close, back to the thing you said at the beginning about the scheduling, right, and the stuff in the database. We often see the same faces as the commentators that are brought in on the news as well. And I know that the Media Trust has done some work to, do coaching for people with disabilities so they can comment as well. But there is a habit of people picking the people that they know, and that then influences people's views. Oh, they came on last time, they got lots of comments. It's about figures and journalistic balance and all of those other topics that you hear about that then influence how society thinks. Those are maybe topics for another episode, because we're pretty much hitting the buffers on time right now. But
I'll just say one thing about that, about diversity. And I've seen this. I've seen people hired because they are different, because they come from different backgrounds, they've got different lived experience to tell, and they're valued. And I've sat in editorial meetings and they will say, pitch a story, and it doesn't land with an editor because the editor doesn't understand it through the same lens. And that same person will pitch another story the next day, and just another story the next day. And they'll go, none of these stories are landing. But then somebody will pitch a story that the editor does get. And slowly, that person who was hired for their difference, for their diversity, thinks, right, okay, for me to get a story, I have to pitch it like that. And becomes those edges, those beautiful, diverse differences that person was hired for, become rubbed off. And there's pitching stories then that are a bit ubiquitous, or a bit sort of interesting for the editor. So again, if you had people with different lived experience that were making those editorial decisions, that's maybe where you would see the real value of the diversity. So we get people in, news organisations and the news industry get people in at that entry level. But the other parts of the puzzle in the equation are to really foster inclusion and belonging. You have to get them moving up through so they're being able to influence decision making.
Yeah, absolutely. We need that influence. Thank you, Johnny. We have to close. We're hit the buffers on time. Need to thank our friends at Amazon and Cleartext for keeping us on air and keeping us accessible. Look forward to continuing this discussion.
Thank you, Johnny.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been brilliant. Thanks.